Passion that I did, the written word was very important because it was, you got all those books, the Bible, you've got the different Gospels and stuff that people are quite familiar with.
For centuries, most Christians believe the Bible we know today contains everything about the mission of Jesus. But in the Ethiopian Bible, things look very different. This ancient Bible, preserved for generations, includes books and teachings that never appeared in most Western Bibles. It holds early traditions about faith, angels, and the spiritual world that have long been forgotten. When filmmaker Mel Gibson, known for directing The Passion of the Christ, started exploring ancient biblical sources, what he found enlightened him more about the hidden story of Christ's resurrection. Could these ancient writings hold clues about Jesus that the world overlooked for centuries? And if so, why were they left out of modern Bibles? Join us as we uncover how this changes how we understand the story of the Messiah. Behind the Resurrection. The global film industry witnessed an unusual moment in 2004 when the Christian drama The Passion of the Christ reached extraordinary success. The film, directed by Mel Gibson, focused on the final hours of the life of Jesus with a level of visual intensity rarely seen in religious cinema. The production attracted attention across the world for its harsh realism and emotional power, eventually earning more than $600 million worldwide. That success showed a massive public interest in religious storytelling that did not soften difficult or painful moments. Discussion about a follow-up project soon began after the film reached theaters. For many years, Mel Gibson spoke in interviews about continuing the narrative beyond the crucifixion. Plans for another film focused on the resurrection of Jesus, rather than repeating events already shown. The proposed story did not center only on the discovery of an empty tomb or the appearances that followed. Instead, the concept explored the hidden period between the death of Jesus and the moment of resurrection. That idea opened the door to a much larger spiritual landscape. Traditional gospel narratives in the New Testament present the resurrection in a simple and direct way. The books of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John describe the crucifixion, the burial, and the later discovery that the tomb no longer held the body. Appearances of the risen Jesus then follow. These texts describe events on earth and interactions between people who witnessed them. The scriptures provide very little information about what occurred between the moment of death and the moment of rising. Ancient Christian traditions outside the familiar gospel stories described a much broader vision of that period. Some writings spoke about a descent into spiritual realms beyond ordinary human experience, in which Jesus moved through layers of heaven and regions beneath the earth where unseen powers existed. These works circulated widely in early religious communities during the centuries surrounding the rise of Christianity. In some Christian traditions, these writings continued to influence theological imagination long after they disappeared from the most common biblical collections. The religious heritage of the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church preserved many of these broader traditions. Within that church, certain ancient writings remained part of the larger scriptural collection. Theological ideas contained in those texts continued shaping the spiritual worldview of Ethiopian Christianity. One well-known example appeared in the ancient Christian confession known as the Apostles' Creed, which described a descent into the realm of the dead before the resurrection. Medieval religious literature also explored similar imagery. A modern film exploring the resurrection through this cosmic vision could create a new form of religious storytelling. Within such a visual world, the figure of Christ moved through multiple spiritual realms as a victorious ruler rather than a passive observer. This journey involved confronting dark powers, breaking chains of captivity, and reclaiming dominion across the layers of creation. The descent reached the deepest regions of darkness before the movement upward through every level of the cosmos. The narrative then returned to the visible world with the event of resurrection. A film built on this vision carries the potential to influence global audiences in a powerful way. The earlier success of The Passion of the Christ demonstrated how strongly cinematic storytelling could affect public conversations about faith. Religious topics that rarely appeared in popular culture suddenly entered mainstream discussion. A new film exploring the resurrection through cosmic theology could extend that conversation into deeper territory. Viewers might begin searching for ancient writings and forgotten texts connected to early Christianity. Modern technology often creates the impression that every ancient text already exists online and fully studied. Many people imagine that the history of religious literature has already been completely mapped and explained. In reality, large collections of manuscripts remain preserved in churches and monasteries around the world. The Ethiopian highlands hold some of the most significant surviving examples of these texts, preserving them through centuries of conflict, isolation, and cultural change. Let's take a look at some of these writings and the knowledge they hold. The Lost Books of Early Christianity. The idea of one single Bible has never truly existed in Christian history. Different Christian traditions preserve different collections of sacred writings. The version used by most Protestant churches contains 66 books. The Catholic tradition includes 73 books. Eastern Orthodox churches accept several additional texts beyond those. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church holds the largest traditional canon, recognizing 81 books as scripture. Scholars sometimes classify these writings in slightly different ways, yet the important point remains clear. The Ethiopian collection of biblical texts is much larger than the versions used by most other churches. This tradition belongs to one of the oldest Christian communities on earth. Christianity reached Ethiopia very early in its history and grew deep roots there. Ancient Christian writings describe an encounter between the Apostle Philip and an Ethiopian court official who served the queen of the Aksumite kingdom. That official was reading from the scroll of Isaiah while traveling along a desert road. The story shows that Ethiopia already had contact with the biblical world during the earliest years of Christianity. Over time, the region became one of the first places where Christianity formed a lasting national tradition. The Aksumite Empire ruled large parts of the region that today includes northern Ethiopia and Eritrea. During the 4th century, the kingdom officially adopted Christianity as its state religion. This decision placed Aksum among the earliest Christian nations in the world. Around the same historical period, religious scholars and scribes began translating biblical texts into Ge'ez. Ge'ez belonged to the family of Semitic languages and eventually became the sacred language used in Ethiopian church worship. When these early translations were produced, the Ethiopian tradition preserved several writings that later disappeared from most other biblical collections. Among these texts was the work known as First Enoch. Another important book was Jubilees, sometimes called Little Genesis because it retold the stories of Genesis and Exodus in expanded form. The text added detailed explanations about sacred calendars, divine agreements, and the unseen spiritual struggle that shaped human events. Another writing, known as the Ascension of Isaiah, described a visionary journey through multiple levels of heaven. Additional writings also became part of the Ethiopian Christian library. One example was The Shepherd of Hermas, a work filled with symbolic visions and strong moral teaching. Early Christians across the Mediterranean world read this text widely during the first centuries of the Church. The Ethiopian canon also contained unique books connected to the Maccabean tradition that did not appear in other Christian canons. These writings existed within Ethiopian Christianity from its early centuries and were treated with the same respect as other sacred scriptures. While many other Christian traditions gradually reduced their list of accepted books, the Ethiopian Church continued maintaining a broader collection. Geography played a major role in this preservation. The Ethiopian highlands were separated from much of the Mediterranean world by large deserts, mountain ranges, and political barriers. Because of this isolation, the manuscript traditions of Ethiopia continued with little interruption for more than 1,000 years, while theological debates elsewhere shaped smaller biblical canons. Among all the preserved writings, the Book of Enoch gained particular importance. This ancient work was traditionally connected to Enoch, the great-grandfather of Noah. The book expanded on the brief mention of Enoch found in the early chapters of Genesis. The narrative told of angels called Watchers who descended to earth and formed unions with human women. Their children became giant beings known as Nephilim, who spread violence across the world. These fallen angels also introduced forbidden knowledge to humanity, including secret arts such as sorcery, astrology, and metalworking. The story continued with descriptions of divine judgment and a cleansing flood sent to remove corruption from the earth. During his heavenly journey, Enoch observed the structure of the universe and witnessed scenes of final judgment. The book also described a divine figure known as the Son of Man, who existed before the creation of the world. This figure appeared seated on a throne of glory and acted as a judge over earthly rulers at the end of time, similar to the descriptions about Jesus, which later appeared within the Gospels and the Book of Revelation. However, there's another ancient manuscript that gives a deeper insight to divinity: the cosmic vision of Christ. Ancient Christian writings contained many stories that expanded the understanding of Jesus beyond the four Gospels. One of the most striking examples appeared in a work known as the Ascension of Isaiah. This text formed through editing over a long period of time. Parts of it came from Jewish storytelling, while later sections carried clear Christian influence. Scholars generally place the development of the work somewhere between the 1st and 4th centuries. The texts combined older prophetic traditions with early Christian ideas about heaven, angels, and the mission of Christ. The first section of the book focused on the death of the prophet Isaiah. The story described a violent execution carried out under the command of a corrupt ruler who opposed the prophet. According to the narrative, Isaiah hid inside a hollow tree to escape capture. Soldiers eventually discovered his hiding place, and the king ordered his death inside that tree. The method of execution involved cutting the prophet in two. The story reflected a theme that appeared frequently in early Christian teaching, in which faithful messengers often suffered at the hands of powerful rulers. The second part of the text moved far beyond the earthly realm. It shifted toward a vision that described the prophet rising through the heavens. Isaiah began a spiritual journey that carried him upward through 7 different heavenly realms. Each level displayed greater brightness and greater glory than the one below it. The lower heavens contained conflict and struggle among angelic beings. Angels appeared organized into ranks and groups with different responsibilities. The structure of the heavenly world revealed order, movement, and constant activity across the unseen universe. As Isaiah traveled higher, the atmosphere changed dramatically. Light grew stronger with each level of heaven. Praise and worship became louder and more intense. The distance between the human world and the divine world slowly faded during the journey. The vision eventually revealed an extraordinary moment that stood at the center of the entire narrative. Isaiah witnessed the coming descent of a divine figure known as the Beloved. This heavenly being prepared to travel downward through every level of heaven toward the physical world. The descent did not happen in open glory at first. The Beloved moved carefully through each level while taking on the appearance of the angels who lived there. At every stage, the figure concealed true identity by adopting the form of those around him, allowing him to continue without recognition from the angels who filled each heaven. The journey continued downward through the firmament and eventually reached the human world. Within this vision, the Beloved entered human history through birth from a woman and experienced suffering, death, and resurrection on earth. After the earthly events concluded, the vision described a second movement through the heavens. The Beloved rose upward again through the same 7 levels. This time, the ascent happened in full glory rather than hiding. Angels across every realm recognized the divine figure and honored his authority while he passed through their domain. The journey presented the resurrection not simply as a return to life, but as a reign throughout the entire structure of reality. Each heavenly level witnessed the restoration of divine rule as the figure traveled upward. This portrayal created a version of the Christ story that appeared far larger than the short resurrection scenes recorded in the Gospels. The narrative showed a divine mission that moved across multiple layers of the universe rather than remaining limited to events on earth. Early Christians who encountered this story could view the resurrection as part of an event that began before human history and unfolded across heaven and earth together. The empty tomb in Jerusalem represented only the visible portion of a much larger spiritual event taking place beyond human sight. Writings about the Ascension of Isaiah circulated among several early Christian communities. Some early church leaders knew about the text and referred to it in their own works. Figures such as Jerome and Epiphanius mentioned the writing during discussions about early Christian literature. Even with this awareness, the book did not enter the final list of scriptures accepted in most Christian traditions. The situation differed in Ethiopia, where the text remained preserved and respected within church teaching. So how was the modern Bible formed? The history of the biblical canon. The broader history of the biblical canon developed slowly across many generations. Early Christian communities did not possess a fixed New Testament during the first centuries of the faith. Instead, they relied mainly on Jewish scriptures, along with letters and stories about Jesus that circulated among different churches. Communities in different regions used different collections of writings for teaching and worship. Churches in Rome, Alexandria, and Ethiopia often relied on different texts depending on their local traditions and connections. Pressure to create a more consistent list of scriptures increased during the 2nd century. Various religious movements began forming their own collections of sacred writings. Some groups rejected certain traditional texts while elevating others. One influential teacher named Marcion removed the Jewish scriptures entirely and accepted only a limited set of Christian writings. His actions forced church leaders to define a clearer set of texts that represented what they believed to be authentic teaching. In the 4th century, an important development occurred when Athanasius, the Bishop of Alexandria, circulated a letter listing 27 books as the proper collection of the New Testament. This list matched the New Testament used by most churches today. Even then, the decision did not immediately apply everywhere. Regional church gatherings such as the councils held at Hippo and Carthage discussed the issue further and gradually reinforced the same collection. The process of forming the biblical canon involved many factors beyond theology alone. Language played a role because writings preserved in Greek spread more widely through the Roman world. Geography also influenced which texts gained attention in major centers of power. Church leaders often favored writings that could be connected to apostles or early Christian teachers. Texts widely read across several regions gained greater acceptance than those used mainly in isolated communities. Over time, these decisions shaped the final form of the Bible used by most Christian traditions. Long before church leaders in the Roman world finished shaping the biblical canon, a very different Christian tradition developed far away in the mountains of northern Ethiopia. In the Tigray region, ancient monasteries stood on steep cliffs and isolated plateaus high above the surrounding valleys. Some of these places appeared almost unreachable. Monasteries such as Debre Damo and Abuna Yemaragu occupied rock formations that required difficult climbs across narrow paths and exposed cliffs. Access to these places involved moving along thin ledges carved into the mountains. These extreme locations existed by deliberate design. Monastic leaders chose isolated landscapes in order to separate religious life from ordinary society. Debre Damo stood on a flat mountain plateau surrounded by vertical stone walls. Entry to the monastery required climbing roughly 15 meters up a steep rock face, using a thick leather rope lowered from above. The community traced its origin to the 6th century when the monk Abuna Aragawi founded the monastery. He belonged to a group remembered in Ethiopian history as the 9 Saints, missionaries who spread Christian teaching throughout the highlands of the region. For more than 15 centuries, monks continued living on that mountain plateau. Their lives revolved around prayer, agriculture, and the copying of sacred texts. Food came from small farms maintained on the mountaintop. Religious services structured the daily rhythm of life, and another central task involved the careful reproduction of manuscripts. Monks prepared parchment from goatskin using traditional techniques passed down across generations. The language used in these texts remained Ge'ez, the ancient liturgical language of the Ethiopian Church. Interestingly, isolation proved to be a very powerful method of preservation. Keeping Christianity's oldest secrets. Many great libraries in the ancient Mediterranean world disappeared through war, fire, and political crisis. During centuries of theological disputes across the Roman Empire, some writings were destroyed, while others faded from use. In Europe and the Near East, many manuscripts vanished during invasions and periods of instability. But Ethiopian monastic communities experienced fewer of these disruptions. Monks continued copying texts generation after generation while preserving both the writings and the craft required to produce them. Across Ethiopia, a vast number of manuscripts accumulated inside churches and monastic libraries. Scholars estimated the existence of roughly 350,000 Christian manuscripts scattered among about 20,000 churches and 8,000 monasteries throughout the country. Many of these collections remained only partially studied. Large numbers of manuscripts still awaited full cataloging or detailed photography. Some remained almost completely unknown outside their local communities. Preservation of these pages did not depend on modern conservation technology. Monks wrapped the books in protective cloth and stored them carefully on stone shelves within monastery buildings. Over many centuries, they continued opening the manuscripts during worship and study. The pages remained remarkably intact. Original ink, pigments, and binding materials survived across 1,500 years through this continuous tradition of care. The manuscript heritage of Ethiopia faced severe danger during recent conflict. Armed fighting began in the Tigray region in November 2020 when tensions between regional authorities and the Ethiopian federal government escalated into war. Federal forces, supported by troops from Eritrea, entered large areas of the region. Monasteries and churches located across the mountains soon found themselves caught inside the conflict. Artillery fire struck Debre Damo during January 2021. Later on, soldiers reached the mountaintop monastery and removed religious treasures. Reports from Walduba Monastery described the disappearance of more than 3,000 parchment manuscripts, along with hundreds of ancient crosses made from gold and silver. Some stolen manuscripts began appearing for sale on international internet marketplaces at extremely low prices. Religious authorities in the region documented heavy losses among clergy during the early months of fighting. Investigations by the Tigray Orthodox Church recorded the demise of more than 300 members of the priesthood within the first 3 months of the war. At least 40 churches and monasteries experienced confirmed damage. Many additional religious sites likely suffered undocumented harm because of limited access to the area. Uncertainty surrounded the safety of the ancient writings for several months during the conflict. Despite these threats, the broader Ethiopian manuscript tradition continued to survive across the country. Tens of thousands of handwritten books remained preserved in monasteries, churches, and private religious collections. Every few years, new discoveries emerged from these archives, including previously unknown texts and early manuscript copies that reshaped scholarly understanding of Christian literary development. International research groups began working with Ethiopian religious communities to document and digitize as many manuscripts as possible. Major efforts involved cooperation with institutions such as University of Hamburg, British Library, and Hill Museum and Manuscript Library. Their projects focused on photographing fragile manuscripts before time, conflict, or environmental damage could destroy them. Now the question is, what if these ancient writings containing visions of cosmic spirituality are eventually presented to the world in a movie? What would be the impact on Christianity? If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.